Okay, thanks again for staying with us on the show. TMI, beautiful Monday morning. I mean, it's Boxing Day. Usually the day after Christmas, like you know, it's Boxing Day. And probably used to think back then, Boxing Day means a day to box, that kind of stuff. But that's not what it's about. It's a day for you to open up the boxes of gifts that you received. I hear now they are quite few that if they even come at all. That's not unconnected with some of the economic challenges that we have in the country. But most importantly, we celebrate life. We celebrate the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the giver of life. That's most important. And if you're alive to witness this day, I mean, you must be grateful about that. Okay, let's go talk about the environment. The environment represents an integral part of the society of the world. And every now and then, the issue of the environment is at the front burner, and that's because of the fight back that is coming from the environment. The changes in temperatures, the changes in atmospheric pollution, be it land, be it water, be it air, just name it, is on the rise. And when you hear some of the things that are happening to the environment, you definitely will weep. But most disturbing is the fact that actions that needed to be taken to stem all of these tides, there's some laissez-faire attitude towards it. In some cases, lack of political will is not there. I have with me in the studio the executive director. I'd like to thank Dr. Gordon Uyojo of Environmental Rights Action and Friends of the Earth. Dr. Joe, thank you. It's always a delight to have you here talking about the environment.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, this is 2022 coming to an end, and we're going into 2023. Let's start by looking at what is the most disturbing environmental issue that has attracted your attention this year, this outgoing year?
Well, on a global scale, the issues remain that of climate change. There is a monumental climate change impacts that are highly catastrophic. And because of that, there are so many incidents of catastrophic events as a result of global warming, which has resulted in extreme weather conditions on a global scale. We saw the example of Pakistan, where 2/3 of the country was underwater. That was not different from Nigeria, where about half of the country was underwater, with several thousands of people dead on a global scale. And recently, we saw the storm bomb in the USA that has already claimed dozens of lives. So, the impact of climate change has remained very severe and is very significant, drawing attention on the need for urgent action that we have always spoke about.
As popular as these concepts are, as real as they are in terms of the impact that we see on a daily basis, why is there so much lethargy in addressing them, in fighting them?
Because I think there's so much lack of political will, lethargy, as you said, because there are very few choices to make. And the choices are difficult also because they border on politics, they border on economy. For example, when countries are negotiating and talking about reducing climate change, they veer suddenly into politics in terms of power relations, those who dictate the agenda and what is to be discussed, as well as remedies that are proffered. For Nigeria, on the economic front, to illustrate your point, we have always agitated for an energy transition from fossil fuel, oil and gas dependence to renewable sources of energy, driven by innovative technology. Of course, Nigeria is willing, they are now willing to do that, but the resources, the technology, and the capacity is limited. So as a result, they have no option than to fall back to oil and gas dependence. This is what is happening in Europe as well, where we saw a situation where Europe also pushing for end to gas flaring, phasing down gas flaring that has already been agreed. But with the persistent war in Ukraine-Russia situation, we find that Europe is having to fall back on gas for survival. This is the situation of the world today.
Fantastic. I'd like to take you to one major part of the conversation on environmental degradation in Nigeria, the Niger Delta question. The issue of artisanal refineries. Just a few days ago, I read about some of the legal refineries that were destroyed, and all of that. And environmentalists like you have consistently said this is not the best way to go. If this is not the best way to go, what is the best way to go in addressing this issue?
Well, I think Nigeria has misplaced its priorities right from the onset to believe in gigantic oil refineries. I happened to be in one of the National Assembly meeting some years back where these artisanal refiners were also invited. And they told the parliamentarians, all you have to do, regularize our activities. Let's do an inventory. Register us. We are willing to contribute to the economy of Nigeria. And that is what led to giving out artisanal modular refinery licensing. That was it. But it turned out that modular refinery, the money for it is in the neighborhood of $20, $50 million. And these local people do not have it. So I strongly believe that the artisanal refinery needs to be looked at very seriously. It is at the moment illegal because the source of the oil is simply theft. The oil, the pipelines going through the oil, the crude oil is caught, and then they take it and they cook it by way of distillation and collect it. And I can tell you in the Niger Delta, several communities depend on these products that is refined at that level. It is illegal, and government is fully aware of this. So the whole essence of capture, kill, destruction will not solve the problem. What is required is alternative vision on how to incorporate these boys, these people, into the economy. So we strongly raise the idea of registering them and regularizing their activities, putting them in these modular refineries, or according to the UNEP, let's look for alternative income sources by way of training, by way of economic activities that will sway them away from artisanal refinery. Let me tell you what will shock you. Oil theft in Nigeria is now in the neighborhood of 500,000 liters per day. And that, in essence, if you look at it from the perspective of 500 million barrels per day. So you can, Nigeria is producing 2.5 million barrels, but for the artisanal refineries, they are already taking a chunk of that. At least 1/5 of that is now in their hands. And this is why you see everywhere in Nigeria clamoring, let's put an end to it. but the solution is nowhere to be found.
Okay. Does it make sense to think about fuel subsidy removal as part of the solution matrix as far as this issue is concerned?
Well, from the World Bank, which is highly susceptible, because if the World Bank is advising you, it's simply talking about production, privatization, and other stuff. But in reality, the subsidy removal on the long run is inevitable. It is something that has to be done, but the crude manner that is being done right now is very painful because there is no cushioning effect. There's no attempt to cushion the effect of subsidy removal with the local populace. What it means is that there's misery, there's pains, there's suffering of the people. So what we are thinking, we have 4 or 5 refineries in Nigeria. Why don't you do a turnaround maintenance? Of course, turnaround maintenance is being done almost on a daily basis.
Without any,
but we don't see any result. And billions of dollars are being spent on this. So why don't we get those refineries on track, get them up speed to produce, to refine, rather than depending on neighboring countries or other countries refining fuel for us. So this is one way we can do that. Number 2, if we are to do removal of subsidies, what happens to the money that will be generated? Will it be confined to a particular purpose and purpose? Or will it simply go to the treasury and then it's shared to the states? So what are the modalities? All these things are not discussed, and this is why people have apathy towards this issue.
Okay. I know that, I think it was a sham that the COP27 held, bringing all the eggheads together, major stakeholders together to talk about climate change and global warming. What would you say are the major pullouts from COP27 2022, and how do you think these pullouts will really shape the conversation on climate change and global warming?
Well, first and foremost, before I do some pullout on what came out, it's essential to understand the politics of negotiation.
Okay.
The politics of negotiation is simply that there's a negotiation going on between rich countries who are culprits of the problem, and then poor countries who are making demands. That is how they have come to the table.
Okay.
Therefore, you can then understand or predict the kind of outcomes that is expected. For example, the COP was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. I was there. And everybody was jubilating in Africa that this is African COP, meaning that African priorities
will be given attention.
Will be privileged and given greater attention.
Okay.
But this was not to be. People say that this is people's COP, meaning that people's needs, people's survival against climate change will be addressed. This did not happen. The COP itself dubbed itself as COP of implementation, meaning that this COP will be action, action, action on discussions in the past. This, again, did not happen. So the pullout in terms of positive was that at least the world agreed to keep the trajectory of 1.5 degrees, to limit world temperature to 1.5 degrees.
Okay.
That was agreed. Effort at mitigating climate change by cutting emissions at source. It's also agreed, it's on the table, and effort is being made towards that direction. But for the Africans, we keep clamoring for adaptation. That is putting in place mechanisms that will build resilience of the people and the communities to ensure that the impact of climate change does not affect people on a monumental scale. This again, you recall in 2009, the Paris Agreement, where $100 billion was pledged on annual basis to Africa. As we speak, that money has not been realized. And so the only good thing that came out from this COP was that a new trajectory has been agreed, and that is loss and damage. Yes, you are addressing mitigation. Yes, you are addressing adaptation. But in the event of monumental damage to infrastructure, even loss of life, agricultural products, who bears the cost? So Africa was able to put on the table the need for a loss and damage financial mechanism, and that was agreed. A framework that will be put, that would require that the polluter pays principle applies. A framework that will ensure that when impasse, severe impasse, like those that happened in Mozambique, in Nigeria, Pakistan, they will be accounted for. Mind you, this is an agreement in principle. It is not binding.
On any of the parties?
It's not binding. And no one should be criminalized for issues or actions as a result of climate change. It's well written in the text.
So it's been described as a positive pullout. How does that resonate with its non-binding, the non-binding part that you talked about? Because we know that many of the biggest polluters, the US, China, and the rest of them, are also very, very, they always foot drag when it comes to this part of conversation.
I'm not sure which text you have read, but in general, civil society do not agree that these are positive outcomes.
Okay.
To clear that. So it's a hope betrayed. Expectations of COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh were not realized. And given on that, civil society, African countries are now pushing that Africans need to have a say in the agenda setting and decision making within the UNFCCC Climate Change Summit discussions. So that is one issue that we are looking at, because to address the issue of not binding is simply that the rich countries, the industrialized countries, they make the rules lax in ways that they are able to escape sanctions. For example, if anybody promised $100 billion since 2009, and you have the creditor, you have the debtor. The industrialized countries are the debtor in this case. And then the African countries, developing countries are the creditor.
Okay.
The creditor is unable to hold the debtor to account. This is what is happening. Because no sanctions, nothing, just appeal. Please, can you pay up? Will you pay up? In the interest of transparency and accountability, in the interest of building trust, can you please pay up? This is the discussion you hear. And it does not push the needle forward.
Okay.
It's just kicking the can down the road. Another thing, pressure was on Africa to end dependence on fossil fuel. Nigeria came up with energy transition plan and said, no, we cannot do it 2030, not even 2050, looking at 2060 upwards. And so, but for us, what we are saying is that Africans, Nigeria is willing 100% to sacrifice its capital assets, oil and gas, provided that industrialized countries put money on the table. And then we can then use that for the energy transition. But they are not willing to put money on the table. They are busy developing their own renewable energy sources, and little or no help is trickling to Africa. This is the situation we find it.
The conversation on energy transition has gained a lot of traction. But in recent time, people have also talked about the funds required for that energy transition. That's, I mean, it's something you just highlighted a while ago. But we've seen today that renewable energy is getting more popular. People are buying solar panels, doing all of those stuff. What does this portend for Nigeria as a country?
It's a very positive note for the global society, and it's even more so significant for Nigeria. It is very important that everybody embrace renewable energy. If Nigeria will not make the commitment to reduce dependence on oil and gas in a short term, it is very encouraging to see citizens, as we have always come here to talk about, that they should take ownership of the energy system in terms of renewable energy. I'm aware of some people that have disconnected from this PAC or DISCO because they are now energy self-sufficient. As a result of that, they are able to control the energy pattern. But beyond that, we are saying that communities should come together and put in place community energy systems by way of mini-grid and off-grid system in the communities, so that they are the producers as well as suppliers and end users of the energy they produce. This is essential. But Nigeria, Africa, we have the weather, good weather in terms of sunshine, and we have the wind in terms of the ocean current and all that, but we are unable to tap into them. So we are asking, what is the problem? Where are the technology people in Africa that will generate this energy revolution that is already gaining prominence in Europe and industrialized countries?
If you just join us, it's TMI, special edition, Boxing Day edition of the show. And we're taking you off our regular conversation to look at the issue of environment, because that's key when it comes to development against the background of the challenges, the twin problems of climate change and global warming. Whether you like it or not, the impacts of these twin challenges are here with us to stay, except we do something about it in terms of policy initiative, in terms of taking drastic action to change the tide. Otherwise, these problems will continue to bedevil the environment. I mean, just think about some of the flooding that we had this year. One of the worst we've seen in recent times. At some point, it was difficult to go to Bayelsa, go to rivers, because the roads were completely cut off. And surprisingly, we also had such stories to tell about some states in the north. So that is very, very significant. I'm sure you want to comment on that, because we say in the south we have more rainfall, in the north we have less rainfall, but the problems that we had with flooding and erosion was also very visible in the northern part of Nigeria.
I think we can best describe the situation as perennial, and that is how it's going to remain. These issues of extreme weather conditions, in some areas, drought. In other areas, there'll be flooding.
Okay.
So it's difficult to explain, but this is what is taking place in the atmosphere. And that is why it is called a climate change. The climate is changing as a result of carbon emissions that are released into the atmosphere. In reality, no region will be spared, and no city. You are either in drought or you are in flood. It's extreme weather conditions. And these, mind you, come with environmental and health hazards, which have not begun to be prominent, but we saw that a little bit in Bayelsa and Rivers, where the outbreak of cholera and other waterborne diseases became very prevalent. So these issues are real, especially in the north. We're talking about the flooding in the north, but more importantly, the north is a dry land, and they are very susceptible to prolonged droughts. that we really turn around the situation in terms of destruction of agricultural patterns. The traditional agricultural pattern of rain-fed agriculture is at risk throughout Nigeria and in Africa. How long can we depend on rain? Because these rains are no longer predictable, and then when they even rain, the volume, the precipitation is either too low or too high. So farmers at the moment, both north and south, they are stand at great risk in terms of livelihoods. And this is why we are calling on loss and damage financial mechanism to address these issues, and if possible, pay compensation to the victims.
In the course of your analysis, you talked about the Niger Delta, what has become of the region in terms of this multiplication of artisanal refineries and the model that needs to be deployed to address the problem. The UNEP report, which resulted in the establishment of the hydrocarbon commission or so, is still a nagging issue that needs to be talked about. What's your take on the extent of impact by high prep, so to speak?
Well, our analysis remains the same. We have cried to high heavens, so to speak, asking for intervention. Effort is being made. It's a federal government environmental legacy project to clean up Ogoniland as a template that we move towards the Niger Delta. But that itself is also a wrong statement, because you've been doing cleanup for the past 3 years now, and there's no template whatsoever. You've not finished cleaning up a small enclave of Ogoniland. How can you be talking of the entire Niger Delta? But that said, the cleanup of Ogoniland, I came here in the past to say that it was politicized. Now I can confidently tell you that the cleanup of Ogoniland is highly, highly politicized. They are enmeshed in ministry struggle over supremacy. The high prep, we have always clamored, ought to be an independent body of its own, a commission that is able to take decisions. But of course, we were happy that it was removed from the Petroleum Ministry, federal government, Federal Petroleum Ministry, and taken to environment. So taking it to environment and subjecting it under environment means that it's a ministerial issue. And then you see high prep now relegated in terms of decision making.
So it would have been better in the Ministry of Petroleum?
No, not at all, because petroleum, we side with oil companies rather than the communities. So what we are saying is that it ought to be independent, and that is what UNEP recommended. UNEP recommended that Ogoni Trust should be set up, the communities should be empowered in ways that they run the system and make them in that process to be in charge. But the reverse is the case. But I must say one thing that is good, which is also negative.
It's good and it's negative.
Yes.
That's double jeopardy.
Yes. we have a pledge of $1 billion to be paid across a 5 years period. And the oil companies are, by my understanding, I don't know the latest figure, but very close to $800 million have been paid, put together. And in that sense, there is some discussion going on and rumors that once the money is completed, they would then deem that the cleanup is also completed. And that is very serious.
All right, this money that have been released, is there a verifiable, touchable, feelable projects that is commensurate with this money that has been released?
According to communities and independent monitors, money expended does not reflect the reality on ground. In places that have been purported to have been cleaned up, crude is still oozing out from the ground. In other places, they've been completely neglected. Don't forget, they struggled at secondary sites, sites with little or no pollution, and that was the first intake. Now they're moving into the major one, which is primary sites, and the procurement system has been very poor, and the transparency, the participation of communities. And so some of us, based on what you just asked, we said, look, the cleanup should have a human face. Let us see how you can impart the people. So if you say you have cleanup, how does the cleanup reflect on improved livelihood of the people? Don't forget that Ogoni land is polluted, the land is polluted, the soil, and there's a signboard, pollution, no farming. In the river, the water is polluted, there's a signboard, no fishing, no swimming. Now, you put all these things there, there are no alternatives in place.
For the communities, for the people.
Yes, so how do you make the cleanup reflect the economy, the local economy of the people, and the welfare, the well-being? How can they see in tangible terms? And this is why we said a chunk of that money should be used for livelihoods, for environmental protection, for gender issues. We spread out a lot of key performance indicators. Okay. Presented this to the federal government as well as HIPREP and policymakers. Of course, they just they pick here and there what they think they should do. But on looking at it on a composite scale, the Ogonis are frustrated, and they see this as a rouse. A lot of money has been expended, and they feel very bad that the outcome is poor.
Okay. I recall that some time ago, the conversation changed to leave the oil in the soil. How relevant is that conversation against the realities of the global energy challenge with the Russia-Ukraine war? You have a lot of countries who probably have been on that trajectory also now, going back to oil, going back to gas, even going back to coal as sources of energy.
Yes, for the past 3 decades or so, I've been one of the champions of leave the oil in the soil. And this has gained global acceptance. There's continuous push on leaving the oil in the soil. But people have come to the reality and to come to understand the importance of leaving the oil in the soil. In the past, when we say this, leave oil in the soil, they say this is not possible. Nigeria is 90% dependent on oil and gas. So how can we leave oil in the soil? Let's use it now, very quickly. But now that you are seeing the monumental impact of climate change, which is as a result of oil and gas consumption, coal, there is need for urgent action to move away from these dirty energy sources to renewable. Now, this debate in Glasgow, COP26 in Scotland, gained prominence. And the global environmental summit agreed that there should be a gradual phasing down instead of phasing out. So the emphasis on let us phase out. But in the agreement, they say gradual phasing down. So that in essence means that yes, you can still use oil and gas, so that narrow window is there. But we continue to insist that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is caused by the rich countries. So Africa is not part of it. As we speak now, Africa emits about 4% of the greenhouse gas. So it is not very significant. So Africa, for me, my proposition is that we are willing right now to forgo our oil, gas, coal, and to jettison it, stop using it, provided that the reserves are quantified in monetary terms. And that monetary terms, the annual volume of oil production in Nigeria is known, 2.5 million barrels per day,
Yeah.
or 2 million.
So you
the federal
multiply
government
that.
is crying out that it's 1 million. So,
We don't even know.
So you can see we can have some permutations.
Yes.
And then you do that across a 30 years period or 35 years period, the duration of the oil reserve that we have.
Okay.
And the money is quantifiable. So put that money on the table, then Africa will be willing to forgo its oil, gas, and coal.
Okay.
Instead of just trying to hoodwink Africa to say, stop using your gas and coal. But now, to your question, the Ukrainian-Russian war have changed the narrative. Rather than Africa being gassed, dependent on gas, we now see that Europe is being gassed. The gasification of Europe is a product of mutual deception that have allowed the global society to think, to adopt gas as a transition energy. This is really surprising.
This was playing out.
This is playing out right now. So even though there's pressure on Africa to stop oil and gas, there are some contracts, bilaterals going on between Europe and African countries and third world countries who are producing coal, oil, and gas. To continue, you saw the diplomacy that is being deployed by Europe and some other countries, in particular with Nigeria and the African countries, to continue the supply of gas. So in essence, the gas supply, the gas production have very little resonance to the welfare of citizens in Nigeria in terms of access. So the issue about energy is how do we address energy poverty as a result of lack of access. That question is not on the table.
Okay. Let me just ask this last question. What's your take? The 2023 election is around the corner. What's your take on the debates or the comments by the presidential candidates on the issue of environment?
Well, I think so far they have displayed monumental ignorance in terms of environmental issues. We don't see very robust articulation of environmental programs. There's no commitment to understand that the economy hinges on the environment. And there's no understanding to show that the environment itself, if it's not well taken care of, it will lead to disastrous consequences. For example, we are concerned with the political domain, we are concerned with the economic domain, but the environment aspect is the substrata, is the one supporting all these systems. So when you see the debate, and you see one minute or 2 minutes being dedicated to environment, it's already relegated because it is not a priority to the candidates. Okay. But be that as it may, the environment domain is new. So I will not necessarily vilify any of them, but I urge them to take a greater interest on the environment. Not just them, but all of us. Let's make the environment an issue in the forthcoming elections so that Nigeria will be better for it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Godwin Uyuju, Executive Director, Environmental Rights Action and Friends of the Earth Nigeria, for sharing your thoughts with us on the burning issue of climate change and global warming and all other ancillary issues to the debate. A clarion call to our presidential aspirants to also look deeply into the issue of environment, because the environment is key to any political issue, to any economic issue, to even any security issue. So that's how we call it a wrap on this segment of the show.